He said that there was a U.S. strike on a drug-carrying boat, is what President Trump said. We have since gotten clarification.
At 2:17 a.m., a single rotor wash ripped across dark waves, tossing salty spray into the air. Overhead, a MH-60 Seahawk hovered just 40 feet above the sea, its guns trained on the speeding silhouette of a go-fast boat racing at 50 knots. The men aboard that boat had no idea they were sailing straight into a trap laid hours before by the combined might of FBI, United States Coast Guard, and United States Navy. In that instant, the chase turned into a kill box. The helicopter opened fire, and the engines of the speedboat exploded in a spray of flame and water. 2 tons of pure cocaine, cargo worth an estimated 100 million US dollars, lay exposed, lost, and sinking beneath the waves. Intelligence assets, from a P-8A Poseidon to warship USS Winston S. Churchill, had tracked the vessel from Colombia across hundreds of nautical miles. Now their plan had come to fruition. This was not a routine seizure, it was a warning shot across the bows of every narco-trafficking network in the Caribbean. How did US forces know exactly when and where to strike? Why throw a destroyer, a patrol aircraft, and a sniper heli down on a single speedboat? In this video, we unpack every step, from raw intelligence to the decisive strike, and expose the hidden machinery behind one of the boldest anti-smuggling operations in recent memory. If you want to follow more secret operations and discover how modern naval power is used to fight cartels at sea, subscribe to Military Power and stay alert. When the first pieces of intelligence began to filter in, analysts studying the data noticed a pattern that didn't match the familiar rhythm of Sinaloa's usual routes. For years, the cartel had depended on trucks creeping across rugged terrain or on small aircraft landing on hidden jungle airstrips. These older methods, while risky, were predictable and easier for US agencies to monitor through border sensors and airspace tracking systems. Yet within a short span, something changed dramatically. Shipments that once moved by land or sky started vanishing from those channels. Instead, new reports described cocaine consignments appearing at sea, carried not by fishing vessels or cargo ships, but by long, narrow boats built purely for speed. These sleek craft, known along the coastlines as go-fast boats, were engineered to outrun nearly everything on the water. They skimmed the surface at more than 50 knots, engines screaming, hulls slicing through darkness with no lights, no AIS beacons, and radios kept intentionally mute. One moment they were visible, the next, they were swallowed by night. To conventional ship-borne radar, they were little more than flickers or ghost echoes, almost impossible to distinguish from sea clutter unless spotted at precisely the right angle. Officials reviewing the case learned that the vessel in question carried 2 extremely powerful outboard engines, each estimated at close to 900 horsepower. On such a lightweight frame, that power translated into raw speed, more than enough to push the boat far ahead of most patrol craft. Packed inside the hull were roughly 2.2 tons of high-purity cocaine, all of it loaded in Colombia and intended for a chain of drop-off points farther north. For smugglers, the calculation was simple: sacrifice cargo space for speed and hope to outrun any trouble well before it arrived. From the cartel's perspective, the plan seemed logical. Go-fast boats had become a preferred solution for traffickers across the Eastern Pacific and the Caribbean, precisely because they could slip past naval patrols that relied on slower cutters. The combination of a planing hull, a narrow beam, and massive engines created a craft that could hop over waves rather than plow through them. In bad weather, when larger ships slowed down, these boats sometimes went even faster. It was no surprise that criminal groups increasingly turned to them. This shift marked a strategic change, a maritime workaround meant to bypass the growing network of surveillance systems that monitored land routes. Yet the same features that made these boats formidable also created their downfall. By turning to speed and minimal signatures, the smugglers inadvertently exposed themselves to a type of surveillance that didn't depend on surface detection. Above the sea, aircraft equipped with long-range sensors could search vast areas far more efficiently than any patrol vessel. The cartel's builders had focused on defeating ship radar, but they had not considered what might be watching from the sky. As the small craft hurtled through the Caribbean, engines blazing and bow rising with each swell, the smugglers believed their timing and tactics put them beyond reach. To them, the ocean ahead looked empty and safe. In reality, the decisive part of the chase had already begun. High overhead, unseen and unheard, a U.S. surveillance aircraft was tracking their every movement, marking their course with quiet precision. What the traffickers imagined was a clever deviation from old smuggling routes was actually the moment they wandered directly into a prepared net. That aerial shadow, the eye they never expected, was following them mile after mile. It observed the wakes their hull left behind, noted each subtle adjustment, of course, and monitored the engine's heat signature glowing in the dark. All of it fed into a larger plan, unfolding across multiple agencies. The boat, despite its speed, was no longer invisible. It had become the center of a tightening circle. By the time the craft began punching through white-capped swells under the starless sky, the balance had shifted entirely. The cartel's confidence in their fast-moving tactic had transformed from innovation into liability. The water might have concealed them for a moment, but the heavens above offered no escape. What began as a gamble on speed was now turning into a fatal miscalculation. The question that remained, however, was not whether they would be found, because they already had been, but how exactly that distant watcher had detected them so precisely. And more importantly, what force on the water was moving into position, preparing to strike at the perfect moment, without warning and without giving the smugglers even a heartbeat to react. Night had already swallowed most of the Caribbean Sea when a P-8A Poseidon slipped silently above the waves. From perhaps 10,000 feet, its radar scanned the dark expanse relentlessly. Then, the screen lit up. A long, narrow echo streaked across the sea. A vessel roughly 30 feet long, pushing through open water at abnormal speed. Nothing like a fishing boat. This was something built to outrun trouble. The P-8A's multi-mode radar suite had locked onto it. The Poseidon's operators immediately shifted to another sensor feed. Infrared cameras painted the mystery boat in glowing contrasts. Two bright signatures flared at the stern, twin outboard engines pumping intense heat into the cool night air. The engines burned far too hot and too consistently to belong to a trawler or a maintenance boat. Combined with its abnormal speed, its profile matched that of a go-fast vessel built specifically for outrunning trouble. In the smuggling world, these boats were the preferred choice for carrying large, high-value loads through remote waters. The P-8A's radar system, combining synthetic aperture radar with tracking radar modes, gave the crew a high-resolution, all-weather view of surface traffic, even in dark or stormy seas. That made the plane a nightmare for smugglers who counted on speed and silence. As one analyst put it, P-8 is the backbone of U.S. maritime surveillance, able to spot small surface targets and provide real-time targeting data to strike forces. Once the go-fast boat had been tracked long enough to confirm its direction and speed, the Poseidon crew gave the signal that the interception teams were waiting for. They relayed updated coordinates to surface forces already preparing for high-speed pursuit. Now the responsibility shifted. The aircraft could continue watching, but stopping the boat required another set of tools: fast cutters, helicopters, and a warship capable of cutting off escape paths. The aircrew knew that the next phase would be the most difficult, the moment when technology handed the chase over to timing and raw precision. At that moment, the cartel's gamble became fatal. The smugglers had believed speed and darkness were enough to defeat radar and patrol boats. Instead, they met a predator above them, silent, patient, watching every movement from miles away. From high altitude, the P-8A had transformed a stretch of ocean into a deadly kill zone. This was no simple reconnaissance flight. With its radar, electro-optical and infrared sensors, and long endurance, the The P-8A provided continuous surveillance across hundreds of miles, enough to track a single fast boat from Colombian coast to the interception zone. Its versatility made it a potent tool against narco-smuggling networks using maritime routes. With the target locked and the interception force mobilized, the next step would be decisive, the moment when speed met steel and the cartel's gamble met cold precision. But finding a boat racing at 50 knots is merely the opening move. Closing the gap on the open sea, where the smugglers can change direction at any moment, is the true challenge. The Poseidon could guide the task force, but catching the vessel before it slipped into a new shipping lane or faded into coastal shadows demanded perfect choreography. The aircraft had done its part, turning a dark ocean into a brightly marked map. Now the question became whether the forces beneath the clouds, those waiting on destroyers and small craft, could reach the target before it vanished again. And so, as the P-8A continued its steady orbit overhead, the final question sharpened in the minds of the crews preparing to strike. Detecting the smugglers was one thing, but how would the United States close in quickly enough to turn surveillance into capture before the go-fast boat disappeared into the endless darkness ahead? At the moment the coordinates from the P-8A Poseidon came through, the guided missile destroyer USS Winston S. Churchill was already carving a steady path through the Caribbean. It was just past 3 in the morning, the kind of hour when the ocean feels endless and quiet. Yet inside the Combat Information Center, the atmosphere changed in a heartbeat. The order was passed across the ship. Alter course, increase speed, prepare the MH-60 Seahawk for immediate launch. What had started as routine patrol shifted instantly into a high-risk drug interdiction strike, the kind documented for years in U.S. Coast Guard press releases, showing how joint maritime forces move with near-surgical coordination when a major shipment is identified. As the destroyer leaned into its new heading, the flight deck crew rushed to bring the Seahawk into launch posture. The aircraft's engines roared awake, cutting through the night air as its rotors began to spin up. Every sailor involved knew the stakes: millions of dollars in narcotics, a potentially armed crew, and a fast-moving target were all converging into a single moment. According to US Navy briefings on counter-drug missions, helicopters are often the only tool capable of matching the raw speed of cartel boats, which can surpass 50 knots when fully powered. The Seahawk was therefore the centerpiece of the plan, and the destroyer's primary job was to get it as close as possible, as fast as possible, without alerting the smugglers. Meanwhile, the U.S. Coast Guard personnel on board prepared their specialized marksmen. These are not ordinary snipers. They are trained for a very specific assignment, described repeatedly in Coast Guard drug interdiction statements: disable engines, not people. Their skill set is designed for precision shots on small, moving targets at sea, while positioned in a vibrating helicopter or cutter. This tactic exists for a reason. A disabled engine forces a boat to stop. A disabled crew creates unnecessary casualties, legal complications, and the loss of critical intelligence. Moreover, keeping suspects alive ensures investigators can retrieve digital devices, GPS logs, communication histories, and contact networks, information that often leads to further arrests across international borders, as documented by numerous Department of Homeland Security releases. With the destroyer now approaching the interception zone, a silent formation took shape across the water. High above, the Poseidon maintained its distant orbit, sending constant updates on the go-fast boat's heading. The aircraft's wide-area sensors acted like a guiding beacon, ensuring the rest of the task force knew exactly where the target was at every moment. Below it, the Churchill pushed forward to cut off the route the smugglers were taking. Running parallel on the eastern and western flanks were Coast Guard fast response boats, each slicing through the waves in a race to squeeze the cartel into a narrowing corridor of escape. The formation resembled a trap unfolding in slow motion. Surveillance from above, blockade from ahead, and pursuit from the sides. This pattern, often referred to by US maritime forces as creating a kill box on water, has been used in multiple high-profile interdictions, allowing agencies to control every possible direction a suspect vessel might attempt to flee. What made this moment more intense than most was the speed of the incoming target. Even with combined assets, catching a boat that light and that fast required perfect timing. Inside the destroyer's CIC, radar operators watched as the bright return of the go-fast boat edged closer to the invisible perimeter forming around it. Every minute mattered. If the crew realized they were being hunted and diverted course even slightly, the entire geometry of the trap would have to be reshaped. That would buy the smugglers precious seconds, enough potentially to slip into coastal shallows or merge into another shipping lane. Then, as the Poseidon confirmed the boat's final approach direction, the order came down for the Seahawk to lift. The helicopter rose into the night with the confidence of a machine built for these exact moments. Searchlights remained off. Communications stayed minimal. From the perspective of the traffickers below, the ocean remained silent, until a faint mechanical hum began to creep into the wind. Seconds later, the hum became a roar. The Seahawk dropped elevation, coming in low and fast, its shadow sweeping across the surface like a predator. The smugglers looked up just as the helicopter crossed overhead, rotor wash exploding across the waves. In that instant, whatever hope they had of outrunning the authorities disappeared. They were boxed in on all sides, blinded from above, and facing a helicopter carrying a team trained to stop them with absolute precision. And in that moment, when they finally saw the outline of the aircraft against the sky, one truth settled over the boat like a weight. Their route was closed, and their escape was gone. They had realized the trap too late, but even with the trap closed around them, one question hung over the dark water. When the Seahawk finally struck, how would a single helicopter bring down a boat racing at 50 knots in total darkness? Darkness lay heavy above the sea. Suddenly, the rotor wash of the MH-60 Seahawk tore through the Caribbean night. The helicopter dropped from stealthy high hover into a steep, low-angle dive, the ocean instantly erupting in froth as its powerful rotors struck the surface. Below, the go-fast boat, speeding just moments before at blistering pace, suddenly lurched, its silhouette illuminated under infrared searchlights, slicing through the inky night like a blade through silk. For the smugglers aboard, there was no warning, only shock. Inside the Seahawk, the U.S. Coast Guard snipers braced themselves. Their target was not the men on deck, but the twin outboard engines mounted at the stern. The heart of the boat's speed, the very thing that had carried 2 tons of cocaine across hundreds of miles. Their mission: disable the engines, end the chase, preserve evidence. This approach reflected a long-established tactic used by U.S. maritime interdiction teams. It avoids unnecessary casualties, ensures suspects live to face justice, and preserves contraband and electronics for intelligence harvesting. In previous operations, such precision engine shots have proven both effective and legally sound when pursued under international maritime law. As the helicopter closed in, the snipers steadied their rifles. The sea churned beneath, spray catching moonlight in ghostly arcs. Time slowed. In those split seconds, everything depended on perfect aim. Wind from the rotors, rocking deck, waves, distance. There was only one chance. Then came the trigger pull. 2 shots rang out in rapid succession. Bullets ripped through the dark water, tearing into the engine housings. A blast of flame. Metal sheared. Then silence. The roar that had driven the boat forward vanished as quickly as it had burst to life. The hull shuddered, tilted, and then began to spin in a spiraling skid. For a moment, only seconds, the boat drifted, powerless, like flotsam in an indifferent sea. Above, the Seahawk hovered motionless. Below, Lights from nearby cutters and fast response craft flickered on. The traffickers, stunned, realized escape was impossible. Their engines destroyed, their speed gone, their cargo exposed. In the dark, the silent watcher from the sky, the patrol aircraft that had tracked them from hundreds of miles, became the unseen judge presiding over their fate. This was the turning point. A violent clash, not of armies, but of speed versus precision, stealth against coordination. The cartel's gamble on a 50-knot run under cover of darkness had crumbled in the span of a heartbeat. The boat no longer belonged to them. It now belonged to justice. However, the true importance of this takedown stretched past the massive cocaine load stacked inside the hull. The most valuable asset the smugglers carried was not the narcotics, but the digital trail hidden inside their phones, GPS units, encrypted chats, and navigation logs. Across previous interdictions, federal agents repeatedly emphasized that capturing suspects alive provided a path to dismantling networks rather than merely disrupting shipments. From a single device, investigators could uncover supply lines, distribution points, contact hierarchies, and upcoming movements. In this case, the operation's real target extended far beyond the men physically present on the boat. As the waves slowly calmed, the boarding teams prepared for the final approach. Their cutters edged closer, searchlights cutting through the dim haze as they secured positions around the immobilized vessel. The traffickers, stripped of speed and surprised into compliance, waited under the harsh glow of the approaching beams. The ocean that had offered them an escape route only hours earlier now served as a stage for their surrender. Still, what happened that night marked only the beginning. The wrecked boat and its ruined engines would soon vanish beneath controlled demolition charges, but the digital intelligence extracted afterward would ripple outward across the region. That single miscalculation, choosing velocity over caution, would unravel larger trafficking channels throughout Central America and the Caribbean. And what the cartel expected to be another profitable delivery instead became the thread that investigators would pull until the entire web began to unravel. In the end, the story of this chase was not about the tonnage seized or the dramatic engine shots. It was about the moment a high-speed gamble collided with an operation built on patience, coordination, and overwhelming reach. And for the smugglers, that collision marked the shift from running free to being exposed, captured, and ultimately dismantled. But once the engines died and the ocean swallowed the last echo of the chase, one question remained. After such a violent stop, what happens when U.S. forces finally step aboard the crippled boat? The answer would unfold in the minutes that followed, beginning with a quiet surrender and ending with the collapse of a network far larger than anyone on deck ever imagined. When the roaring silence finally settled over the sea, the cutters and fast response boats crept forward. The night was still, the only sound the distant slap of waves against hulls. From the deck of one Coast Guard cutter, a team of boarding officers approached the crippled speedboat, its engines destroyed, drifting helplessly, its cargo exposed under dim deck lights. 2 men remained on board. They offered no resistance. In that moment, the chase ended and the arrest began. As dawn crept in, evidence teams confirmed what the infrared sensors and radar had already told them. Inside that battered go-fast boat lay roughly 2 tons of pure cocaine, packed tight in sealed bales. The haul represented a multi-million-dollar shipment, one of the largest interdictions in recent Caribbean operations. The drugs, once destined for U.S. markets, would now become evidence in a federal case. With the load secured and suspects in custody, the authorities did not hesitate. The damaged vessel was loaded with explosives and scuttled, sent to the seabed as proof that the route was closed forever. But the physical cargo was only part of the value seized that night. Agents from the Federal Task Force, including intelligence analysts from the FBI, dove into the electronic trail left behind. Cell phones, GPS logs, message threads, contact lists, navigation waypoints, transaction records. Once decrypted and cataloged, these digital breadcrumbs began to paint a larger picture, one showing how this vessel had been just a single node in a sprawling network. Within 2 weeks, data extracted from those devices triggered 3 additional interdictions at sea, 5 arrest warrants against mid-level cartel operatives, and coordinated raids on several safe houses believed to be used by the cartel. These operations spanned multiple countries across Central America. The chain reaction proved that capturing the crew alive and retrieving their devices was more valuable than simply destroying the vessel or neutralizing the smugglers. The intelligence gained would allow US and Allied authorities to map entire trafficking corridors, predict future shipments, and dismantle support structures far beyond this single boat. The decision to preserve life, reject lethal force, and focus on evidence gathering reflects a long-standing policy in US maritime drug interdiction operations. Rather than treating every mission as a shoot-to-kill scenario, forces prioritize dismantling criminal networks for good. By taking suspects alive, law enforcement can interrogate, extract leads, and build legally sound cases that can survive scrutiny in federal courts. Meanwhile, every digital file, phone log, or contact entry becomes a thread to pull, one that might unravel the cartel's supply chain from Colombia to major cities. Seen through this lens, the destruction of the Go-Fast boat was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a larger unraveling. After the interdiction, individuals tied to the network began to scatter. Some went into hiding to avoid imminent capture. Others abandoned routes that had once been reliable, forcing traffickers to restructure operations at significant cost. Communications channels shifted abruptly, adding further pressure to an already disrupted pipeline. Even cartel members not directly linked to the seized boat understood the message: speed and stealth, once considered near foolproof, were no longer protection against surveillance that extended across sea and air. For the personnel involved, the pilots who tracked the vessel, the analysts decoding its electronic trail, the Coast Guard teams who boarded it, and the naval crew who enabled the strike, the success of the operation was measured not just in the tonnage removed from circulation, it was measured in the clarity gained. They had used discipline and restraint to turn one interception into a key that unlocked the secrets of a far more complex and hidden system. Through steady coordination across agencies, they transformed a nighttime pursuit into a strategic victory, with consequences reaching far beyond the horizon. As the remains of the scuttled craft quietly settled on the ocean floor, and the first full rays of sunlight stretched across a newly secured stretch of the Caribbean, the significance of the mission sharpened. A single boat had exposed the operations of an entire network. So if just one boat could expose so much, how many other paths remain hidden beneath the sea's vast surface, waiting, moving, unseen? As the final waves settled over the shattered wake of the intercepted speedboat, the full weight of the operation became clear. In just a few hours, US forces had tracked, pursued, and neutralized one of the fastest maritime smuggling routes used by the Sinaloa network. From the first radar contact to the moment the boat sank beneath the Caribbean, every phase showed how quickly the United States can detect a threat, strike with precision, and secure the intelligence needed for wider investigations. Reports from recent maritime interdictions confirm that this joint force model has become one of the most effective tools in countering high-speed narcotics trafficking across the region, with multi-agency cooperation now producing record-level seizures year after year. Moreover, the collaboration between the FBI, the US Navy, and the Coast Guard demonstrated a modern template for maritime policing. Investigate from the air, close the trap from the sea, and dismantle the network through intelligence gathered afterward. It is a cycle that turns a single interception into a chain reaction of follow-up raids, arrests, and deeper disruption. Yet the ocean remains vast, and traffickers continue to adapt. If they begin shifting towards semi-submersible craft or remotely piloted sea drones, the challenge will evolve again. How will U.S. forces respond to the next generation of smuggling technology hiding beneath the waves? If you want to continue uncovering the hidden tactics behind America's special operations at sea, share your thoughts below and subscribe to Military Power, because the missions ahead will only get more intense and the stories waiting offshore are far from over.